Zextar the Destroyer stood in the center of the chrome-plated arena, his four muscular arms spread wide as the crowd of 1,000,000 beings roared their approval. Sweat dripped from his purple-scaled hide as he looked down at his latest opponent, a Crystallian warrior whose diamond-hard exoskeleton now lay shattered across the arena floor. The fight had lasted exactly 14 seconds. "Is there no one left who can challenge the champion of champions?" Zextar bellowed into his voice amplifier, his words echoing across the massive Colosseum of Andromeda Prime. His yellow eyes swept across the VIP section where the Galactic Empire's highest officials sat in their floating observation pods. Emperor Valdius the Eternal leaned forward in his golden throne, his ancient face creasing into what might have been a smile. The ruler of 12,000 star systems had not been entertained like this in centuries. "Magnificent as always, my champion. But perhaps it is time for a new kind of challenge." Zextar had been undefeated for 7 standard years. He had crushed warriors from every known species in the galaxy. The Titanium Lords of Fortress Prime had sent their greatest gladiator. Zextar had broken him in half. The Hive Queens had unleashed their most deadly warrior drones. He had torn through them like paper. Even the legendary storm giants of the Outer Rim had fallen before his might. The crowd began chanting his name. "Zextar! Zextar! Zextar!" The sound thundered through the arena like an earthquake. Millions of credits changed hands in the betting pools. Zextar was not just a fighter. He was the ultimate expression of physical perfection, a being engineered for one purpose: to dominate all others in combat. His species, the Caraxians, were bred for war. Their homeworld was a harsh place where only the strongest survived. Zextar had clawed his way to the top of his species' warrior hierarchy before being discovered by Imperial scouts. He stood 12 feet tall, with reflexes faster than a striking viper and strength that could crush steel. His forearms could attack from multiple angles simultaneously, and his hide was tough enough to deflect most energy weapons. But it was not just his physical gifts that made him supreme. Zextar had studied every fighting style in the known galaxy. He had mastered the flowing water dance of the Aquarians, the lightning-fast strikes of the Voltan assassins, and the grappling techniques of the rock miners of Kepler 7. He could adapt to any opponent's style within minutes and turn their own techniques against them. "My lord," came a voice from the Emperor's communication device. It was General Thorn, the Empire's chief military advisor. "We have received an interesting proposal." Emperor Valdius raised one jeweled hand, and the crowd's roar immediately died to a whisper. Such was the power of the man who ruled half the galaxy. "Speak, General." "The humans, my lord. They have heard of our champion's reputation. They wish to send a representative." A ripple of laughter swept through the VIP section. The humans, those strange pink-skinned creatures from the recently discovered Sol system, were known throughout the galaxy as curiosities rather than warriors. They were weak compared to most species, lacking natural armor, claws, or significant size. Their technology was primitive, and they had only achieved faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. Zextar himself chuckled, a sound like grinding stone. "The humans? My lord, I could defeat their entire military with one arm tied behind my back." "That may be true, my champion," the Emperor said, stroking his silver beard. "But they have made an interesting claim. They say they possess a warrior whose philosophy of combat is so different from ours that victory is guaranteed without throwing a single punch." The laughter grew louder. How could anyone win a fight without fighting? It was absurd. Combat was about strength, speed, and skill. It was about breaking your enemy before they could break you. What else could there possibly be? "Furthermore," General Thorn continued, "they have wagered something quite valuable. If their representative loses, they will surrender 3 of their most advanced research facilities to the Empire. But if they win, what could they possibly want that we would agree to?" Emperor Valdius asked. "Recognition as an independent species free from imperial rule." The arena fell completely silent. The humans were technically imperial subjects, though they were so new and seemingly harmless that they had been largely ignored. For them to request independence was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Zextar flexed all 4 arms, his massive muscles rippling. "They seek their freedom through combat? How refreshingly traditional. I accept their challenge, my lord. It will be amusing to crush their hopes along with their champion." Emperor Valdius considered for a long moment. The humans had nothing he truly needed, but the entertainment value alone was worth it. And if this mysterious human warrior actually possessed some unknown fighting technique, it could be valuable to study. Very well, the Emperor declared, his voice carrying across the arena. Let the humans send their champion. We shall see what these strange creatures think they know about warfare. The crowd erupted in cheers and laughter. Betting pools immediately opened with odds heavily favoring Zextar. Some bookmakers were offering 1,000-to-1 odds against the human challenger. Zextar raised his forearms in triumph. He had never felt more confident. What could one weak human possibly do against 7 years of perfect victories? He was the apex predator of the galaxy, the ultimate fighting machine. Whatever the humans sent, it would be over in seconds. As he walked from the arena, already planning his victory celebration, Zextar had no idea that in just 7 days, everything he believed about combat, strength, and power would be turned completely upside down. The message had already been sent to Earth. Somewhere in the ancient mountains of Japan, a figure in simple black robes received word that the galaxy's greatest warrior awaited a challenger. The ninja smiled in the darkness. Master Takeshi Yamamoto knelt in the ancient temple garden, watching the morning mist rise from the pond. At 73 years old, he moved with the fluid grace of water, each gesture deliberate and economical. His weathered hands rested on his knees as he meditated in the pre-dawn silence of the Japanese mountains. The message had arrived 3 days ago through official channels. The Galactic Empire wanted Earth to send a representative to face their champion in single combat. The stakes were simple. Win and humanity would be recognized as an independent species. Lose and Earth's most advanced research facilities would belong to alien masters. Most people on Earth had laughed at the challenge. How could any human stand against an alien warrior who had conquered champions from across the galaxy? The military had run calculations. Even their best soldiers with advanced exoskeletons and energy weapons would likely fail against such a being. But Director Sarah, Chen of the United Earth Defense Council, had remembered something from her studies of human history. She had tracked down Master Yamamoto in his remote mountain retreat and presented him with an unusual request. "You want me to fight an alien gladiator?" the elderly man had asked, his voice calm as still water. "Not fight, Master, win." Now, as Takeshi stood and began his morning kata, moving through the ancient forms with liquid precision, he reflected on the path that had brought him here. He was the last true master of an art that had been passed down through 40 generations. Not just ninjutsu, but something deeper. The way of no fighting, the path of victory without conflict. His great-grandfather had been among the last ninja to serve in actual warfare. But Takeshi had dedicated his life to understanding the deeper principles behind the ancient arts. He had spent decades studying not just combat techniques, but psychology, philosophy, and what the old masters called the invisible battlefield. A young aide approached respectfully and bowed. "Master, the transport ship is ready." Takeshi nodded and gathered his simple belongings: a single black outfit, a few basic tools, and an ancient scroll containing wisdom from his ancestors. He carried no weapons, no armor, no technology. To outside observers, he looked like an ordinary old man about to face the most dangerous warrior in the galaxy. The journey to Andromeda Prime took 2 days via the Empire's fastest transport. Takeshi spent the time in meditation, ignoring the stares and whispered conversations of the ship's crew. They clearly thought Earth had sent him to die. "Sir," one young officer had finally approached him, "I've seen the footage of this Zextar creature. He's killed beings twice your size with his bare hands. Are you sure you don't want any weapons? Any protection?" Takeshi had smiled gently. "What is the strongest thing in the world?" The officer frowned. Steel, diamond, neutronium, water," Takeshi replied. "It yields to everything, yet in time it carves through the hardest mountain. It has no shape of its own, yet it can take any form. It seems weak, yet it is unstoppable." The officer walked away shaking his head, convinced that Earth had sent a madman to their doom. Upon arriving at Andromeda Prime, Takeshi was escorted to the vast Colosseum complex. The sheer scale was overwhelming. Millions of beings had traveled from across the galaxy to witness what they expected to be the shortest fight in arena history. The betting odds against him were astronomical. In the preparation chambers beneath the arena, Takeshi was examined by imperial physicians who wanted to verify he was indeed the chosen champion. They measured his height, 5 feet 8 inches, his weight 160 pounds, his age 73 standard years. "This cannot be correct," muttered the lead physician, an insectoid being with multiple eyes. "Your species must have made an error. This being shows no enhanced modifications, no genetic improvements, no cybernetic implants. His bone density is normal. His muscle mass is average for his species. How can this be your champion?" The human diplomatic escort simply shrugged. They had asked the same questions but had been told to trust the old man's methods. That evening, Takeshi was granted a brief audience with Emperor Valdius himself. The ancient ruler studied the small human with curious eyes. "So you are the one who claims you can defeat my champion without fighting?" "Yes, your majesty." "How?" Takeshi bowed respectfully. "A mountain does not fight the wind, yet the wind cannot move the mountain. The moon does not battle the ocean, yet it controls every tide. True strength is not about force, it is about understanding." Emperor Valdius leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "And what do you understand that my champion does not?" "That there are many kinds of victory, and the greatest victories are won before the battle begins." The emperor's advisors whispered among themselves, some laughing softly. But Valdius himself remained thoughtful. In his thousands of years of rule, he had learned that the most dangerous opponents were often those who appeared least threatening. "We shall see tomorrow, little human. But know this, if you attempt any trickery or deception, the consequences for your species will be severe. I would not dishonor my ancestors or my people with deception, your majesty. Everything I do tomorrow will be exactly what it appears to be." That night, alone in his simple quarters, Takeshi performed one final meditation. He thought of his teachers, of the wisdom passed down through generations, of the true meaning of the warrior's path. Victory and defeat, strength and weakness, life and death. All were part of the same eternal dance. Tomorrow he would show the galaxy something it had never seen before. Not the strength of weapons or muscles, but the power of the human spirit to find a different way. In the morning, millions would watch as an elderly human walked into an arena to face a being who had never known defeat. They would expect to see a slaughter. Instead, they would witness something that would change their understanding of what it meant to be strong. Takeshi smiled as he drifted into peaceful sleep. The hardest battles were always won in the mind first. The Colosseum of Andromeda Prime had never held such a crowd. Over 2 million beings filled every seat, while billions more watched through galactic broadcast networks. The air itself vibrated with excitement and anticipation as vendors sold refreshments and bookmakers closed their betting pools at the last moment. In the champion's preparation chamber, Zextar performed his pre-fight ritual. His 4 massive arms moved through combat forms that had been perfected over millennia. Each movement was precise, powerful, designed to kill. His purple scales gleamed under the bright lights, as his personal attendants applied protective oils and checked his natural armor. "For any weak points, the human has been placed in the opposite chamber," his chief trainer reported. "Our spies say he spends his time sitting motionless in some kind of trance." Zextar laughed, a sound like grinding boulders. "Meditation will not save him from my claws. Have you learned anything about his fighting style?" "That's just it, my lord. We can find no record of him ever engaging in combat. No tournament victories, no military service, no documented fights of any kind. The humans appear to have sent us an elderly civilian." This gave Zextar pause. In his experience, civilizations did not achieve interstellar travel by being completely irrational. There had to be something they were missing. What of hidden weapons? Genetic modifications? Cybernetic implants? Nothing, my lord. Imperial scanners show him to be completely unmodified. He carries no weapons, no armor, no technology of any kind. By every measurement we can take, he is simply an ordinary old human. Zextar flexed his claws thoughtfully. Perhaps this was some form of psychological warfare, sending someone so obviously weak that their confidence itself would be unsettling. Or maybe it was a cultural gesture, a way of surrendering with honor rather than sending someone who might actually challenge him. Either way, he would show the same respect he showed all opponents by ending it quickly and cleanly. Across the arena, in a chamber identical to Zextar's, Master Takeshi sat in perfect stillness. His breathing was slow and deep, his mind clear as mountain air. The noise from the crowd above was like distant thunder, present but irrelevant to his state of inner calm. A young Imperial official entered nervously. "Sir, it's time. The arena awaits." Takeshi opened his eyes and nodded. He rose gracefully to his feet and followed the official through the corridors toward the arena floor. As they walked, the roar of the crowd grew louder and louder until it was like standing next to a waterfall. "Sir," the official said hesitantly, "are you certain you don't want any protective gear? The Empire's rules allow for basic armor." "Thank you, but no. I have all the protection I need." They emerged into blazing arena lights. The crowd's roar became deafening as 2 million beings caught their first glimpse of the human challenger. A wave of laughter rippled through the stands as they saw the small, elderly figure in simple black clothing walking calmly toward the center of the arena. From the opposite entrance, Zexitar emerged like a force of nature. 12 feet of pure muscle and aggression. His forearms spread wide as he acknowledged the crowd's cheers. His yellow eyes locked onto Takeshi immediately, analyzing, calculating, measuring threat levels. The two fighters approached the center of the arena where Emperor Valdius waited in his hovering observation platform. The contrast was almost comical. The massive alien warrior who looked like he could bench press a spacecraft, and the small human who looked like he should be tending a garden somewhere. "Champions," the Emperor's voice echoed through the arena. "You both understand the stakes. The human victory brings independence for their species. The alien victory brings valuable research facilities to the Empire. Are you both prepared?" Zextar nodded curtly, his gaze never leaving his opponent. Up close, he could see that the human showed no signs of fear. No elevated heartbeat, no nervous sweating, no tension in his posture. This was either supreme confidence or complete acceptance of death. "I am ready, Your Majesty," Takeshi said with a respectful bow. "Very well. You may begin when the signal sounds." As the Emperor's platform rose to a safe distance, Zextar began to circle his opponent. This was his standard opening. Study the enemy's movements, look for tells and weaknesses, then strike with overwhelming force. But something strange happened. The human did not move. He simply stood in the center of the arena, perfectly relaxed, watching Zextar with calm, dark eyes. There was no defensive posture, no attempt to track the larger being's movement, no preparation for attack or defense. "What are you doing?" Zextar called out, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet of the arena. The crowd had fallen silent, sensing that something unusual was happening. "I am waiting," Takeshi replied simply. "Waiting for what?" "For you to begin." Zexitar stopped circling, confusion creeping into his tactical mind. "I have begun." "This is combat. I am your enemy." Takeshi tilted his head slightly like a bird listening to distant music. "Are you?" The question hung in the air like incense. In the VIP section, beings who had traveled across the galaxy to see a bloodbath found themselves leaning forward, straining to hear this quiet conversation between predator and prey. "Of course I am your enemy," Zextar roared, his confusion turning to anger. "We are here to fight. One of us must be defeated." "Must we?" Takeshi asked, his voice still perfectly calm. "Who decided this?" For a moment, Zextar was speechless. The question was so simple, yet it struck at something fundamental he had never questioned. Who had decided they must fight? The Emperor had arranged it, but why had he accepted? The humans had issued the challenge, but why had he agreed? Because that was what he did. He was a fighter. Fighting was his purpose, his identity, his entire existence. "I am Zextar the Destroyer," he said, as if reminding himself as much as informing his opponent. "I have never been defeated. I have crushed the champions of 1,000 worlds. And how do you feel about that?" Takeshi asked gently. The question hit Zextar like a physical blow. How did he feel? No one had ever asked him that. Victory was good, defeat was bad. Strength was valued, weakness was despised. These were facts of existence, not matters for feeling. I feel, he began, then stopped. The words would not come. In the stands, millions of beings watched in growing amazement. This was not the fight they had expected. There were no flying fists, no clashing weapons, no displays of superhuman strength. Instead, there was something far more dangerous happening. The human was making the galaxy's greatest warrior think. The silence in the arena stretched like a held breath. 2 million beings watched as the galaxy's most feared warrior stood frozen, struggling with a question no one had ever asked him before. How did he feel about his victories? Takeshi remained perfectly still, his dark eyes holding no judgment, no mockery, only patient curiosity. He was like a mirror reflecting back something Zextar had never been forced to see. I feel... Zextar began again, his four massive hands clenching and unclenching. I feel empty. The word escaped before he could stop it, and its honesty shocked him. In the VIP section, Emperor Valdius leaned forward, his ancient eyes narrowing with interest. This was not proceeding as anyone had expected. Empty, Takeshi repeated softly as if tasting the word. After all those victories, all that strength, all that destruction, you feel empty? No. Zextar roared, anger flashing through him like lightning. I feel powerful. I feel victorious. I am the champion of champions. But even as he said the words, they felt hollow. How many times had he stood over broken opponents, arms raised in triumph, waiting for the satisfaction that never quite came? How many victories had he celebrated alone in his quarters, wondering why the taste of success always turned to ash? You are indeed powerful, Takeshi agreed. Your strength is legendary across the galaxy. But tell me, what happens when the fighting stops? Zextar's mouth opened, then closed. What did happen when the fighting stopped? He trained for the next fight. He studied potential opponents. He prepared for the next battle. When was the last time he had simply existed without purpose tied to combat? The fighting never stops, he said finally. There is always another challenger, another battle, another victory to win. And when you have defeated every possible opponent, when there is no one left to fight? The question hit like a physical blow. Zextar had never allowed himself to consider it. What would he be if he was not fighting? Who was he beyond the arena? You're trying to confuse me with words, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. This is a trick, some form of mental warfare. Takeshi smiled gently. Is understanding yourself warfare? Is honest reflection an attack? Around the arena, the crowd had grown restless. They had paid to see violence, bloodshed, the clash of mighty warriors. Instead, they were witnessing something unprecedented. A therapy session in the middle of a gladiatorial match. But in the VIP section, the most intelligent beings in the galaxy were beginning to understand what they were seeing. The human was not fighting the champion's body. He was engaging his mind, his heart, his very soul. You know, Takeshi said conversationally, in my studies of ancient Earth history, I learned about a warrior much like yourself. His name was Miyamoto Musashi. He was perhaps the greatest swordsman who ever lived, undefeated in over 60 duels. Zextar found himself listening despite his confusion and growing discomfort. Near the end of his life, Musashi wrote about the true path of the warrior. He said that the ultimate goal of martial arts was not to defeat others, but to defeat the angry, violent, struggling self within. He discovered that the greatest victory was learning when not to fight. That makes no sense, Zextar protested. A warrior who does not fight is not a warrior at all. Is he not? Takeshi asked. What if I told you that standing here talking with you now, I am demonstrating the highest level of martial arts my people have ever developed? Talking is not fighting. Exactly. Takeshi's eyes twinkled with something that might have been humor. I am winning a battle without raising my fist. I am defeating the galaxy's greatest warrior without causing him any physical harm. Is this not a greater demonstration of skill than simply hitting you very hard? Zextar felt something crack inside his chest, not bone, but something deeper. A worldview that had defined him for his entire life was beginning to crumble. But how can you win if you don't fight me? Look around you, Takeshi said gently. Look at this crowd, at the Emperor, at yourself. Do you see any violence? Any destruction? Any pain? Zextar looked. The arena was intact. No blood stained the sand. He was uninjured, as was his opponent. Yet somehow, impossibly, he felt more defeated than he ever had after any physical battle. I don't understand, he whispered. Your people sent you here to fight, Takeshi continued. But what if fighting is not what you truly want? What if deep in your heart you are tired of causing pain? What if you have been searching your whole life for someone strong enough to show you a different way? The words hit like arrows finding their mark. Images flashed through Zextar's mind, opponents begging for mercy he could not give. Victory celebrations that felt more like funerals. Nights spent staring at the ceiling wondering if this was all there was to existence. I have been the strongest for so long, he said, his voice barely audible. If I am not the strongest, then what am I? You are Zextar, Takeshi said simply. Not Zextar the Destroyer. Not the champion of champions, not the galaxy's greatest warrior. Just Zextar. And maybe, for the first time in your life, you can discover who that person truly is. In the crowd, a strange thing began to happen. The initial restlessness was giving way to fascination. Beings who had come to see blood were finding themselves moved by something far more profound. They were watching a soul being reborn. Emperor Valdius found himself gripping the arms of his throne. In thousands of years of rule, he had never seen anything like this. The human had taken his greatest weapon, his undefeatable champion, and was systematically dismantling everything that made him dangerous. But he was doing it with kindness, with wisdom, with a gentleness that made the victory absolute. Zextar looked at his 4 hands, hands that had dealt death across the galaxy. Then he looked at the small human who had just offered him something he had never known he wanted, the chance to be more than just a weapon. "What happens now?" he asked, and for the first time in years his voice sounded young and uncertain. Takeshi smiled. "Now, my friend, you get to choose." The word choose hung in the air like a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for decades. Zextar stared at Takeshi, then at his own hands, then at the millions of beings watching from the stands. For the first time in his adult life, he had been offered a choice that had nothing to do with combat. I don't know how to choose," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "All my life, others have chosen for me. My parents chose that I would be a warrior. My trainers chose how I would fight. The Empire chose who I would face. I have never—" His massive frame began to tremble, not with rage or battle fury, but with something far more profound, the overwhelming weight of possibility. Takeshi stepped closer, moving with the fluid grace that marked all his actions. The crowd held its breath, expecting the small human to be crushed for his boldness, but Zextar made no move to attack. "Would you like to know what I see when I look at you?" Takeshi asked gently. Zextar nodded, unable to speak. "I see someone who has been carrying the weight of the galaxy's expectations for so long that he has forgotten his own dreams. I see a being of incredible strength who has never been allowed to use that strength to protect rather than destroy. I see someone who has spent so long being feared that he has forgotten what it feels like to be loved." Tears, actual tears, began to fall from Zextar's yellow eyes. The sight sent shockwaves through the arena. The galaxy's most feared warrior was crying in front of 2 million witnesses. "But most of all," Takeshi continued, "I see someone who is brave enough to change." In the VIP section, Emperor Valdius found himself gripping his throne so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. This was not just the defeat of his champion. This was the dismantling of everything the Empire stood for. Power through force, strength through domination, victory through violence. The human was proving that there were other ways, better ways. "You spoke of feeling empty," Takeshi said. "That emptiness is not weakness, it is space. Space for something new to grow. In my culture, we have a concept called mono-no-aware, the bittersweet awareness that all things are impermanent. Your old life as a destroyer is ending, but that means a new life can begin." Zextar sank to his knees, his massive form folding like a collapsing mountain. "But what am I without fighting? What purpose could I possibly have? What did you dream of being when you were young, before the world told you what you had to become?" The question unlocked memories Zextar had buried for decades. Images flashed through his mind. A young Caraxian child fascinated by the intricate patterns of crystal formations in mountain caves. A teenager who had spent hours watching the migration patterns of sky whales across his homeworld's purple skies. A young adult who had written poetry in secret, hiding his words from a society that valued only strength. I wanted to understand things," he said slowly. "The patterns in nature, the way life found ways to thrive in the harshest environments. I wanted to explore, to learn, to discover. And what stopped you? They said I was too strong for such soft pursuits. They said my body was a weapon and weapons must be used. They said understanding was for the weak and I was born to be powerful." Takeshi nodded with deep compassion. "They were wrong. Understanding is the greatest power of all. A weapon can only destroy, but knowledge can create entire worlds." Around the arena, something unprecedented was happening. The crowd, which had come expecting blood sport, found themselves deeply moved by what they were witnessing. Many were crying themselves, thinking of their own deferred dreams, their own paths not taken. "I offer you a choice," Takeshi said, extending his hand to the kneeling giant. "You can stand up and fight me. You can continue being what others made you. You can win this battle and remain the galaxy's greatest destroyer. Zextar looked at the offered hand, then up at Takeshi's face. Or, the ninja continued, you can choose to lay down your weapons forever. Not because you are weak, but because you are strong enough to forge a new path. Strong enough to disappoint those who want you to remain a monster. Strong enough to become who you were meant to be. The silence in the arena was absolute. 2 million beings held their breath as the fate of humanity, and perhaps the galaxy itself, balanced on the edge of one warrior's choice. Zextar looked at his hands one more time. Hands that had brought nothing but death and destruction. Then he looked at Takeshi's hand, small and weathered, extended in friendship rather than violence. If I choose to stop fighting, he said slowly, what happens to you? Your people will lose their independence. They will become slaves to the Empire. Takeshi's smile was radiant. Do you think a people capable of producing someone like me could ever truly be enslaved? Freedom is not something that can be given or taken by others. It exists in the heart. My people will find their way as they always have. Zextar understood then what true strength looked like. It was not the power to destroy, but the courage to choose compassion even when it cost you everything. Slowly, like a mountain learning to bow, Zextar reached out and took Takeshi's hand. The moment their fingers touched, the arena erupted. But it was not the roar of bloodthirsty excitement they had expected to hear. It was something else entirely. The sound of 2 million hearts breaking open, of old assumptions crumbling, of a galaxy beginning to understand that there might be a better way to live. Emperor Valdius stared down at the arena floor where the galaxy's greatest warrior knelt hand in hand with an elderly human, and realized that everything had just changed forever. The age of the destroyer was ending. Something new was about to begin. The arena remained silent for exactly 17 seconds after Zextar took Takeshi's hand. Then, like a dam bursting, the crowd erupted into something that had never been heard in the Colosseum of Andromeda Prime. Not cheers of bloodlust, but something deeper and more profound. It started with a single being in the upper sections, a young Aquarian who began to clap slowly, tears streaming down her translucent face. The sound spread like ripples in a pond, building into a thunderous ovation that shook the very foundations of the massive structure. 2 million beings from across the galaxy rose to their feet, not celebrating violence, but honoring the courage it took to choose peace. Emperor Valdius sat frozen in his floating platform, his ancient mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. In over 3,000 years of rule, he had never seen anything like this. His greatest weapon had just been transformed into something else entirely, not through force or coercion, but through simple human wisdom. On the arena floor, Zextar slowly rose to his feet, still holding Takeshi's hand. The weight of his choice settled over him like a new skin. He was no longer the destroyer. He was no longer the champion of champions. He was simply Zextar, and for the first time in decades, that felt like enough. What happens now? He asked Takeshi, his voice still shaking with emotion. Now we face the consequences of our choices together, the ninja replied calmly, and we discover what courage really means. High above them, Emperor Valdius finally found his voice. Silence, he commanded, his words echoing through the arena's amplification system. The crowd gradually quieted, though the energy of transformation continued to crackle through the air. This was not the contest that was agreed upon, the Emperor said, his voice carrying barely controlled fury. There was to be a battle. There was to be a victor and a defeated. Takeshi looked up at the floating platform and bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, with great respect, there was indeed a battle. And there was indeed a victor. Who? I see no unconscious opponent. I see no blood. I see no defeat. The victor, Takeshi said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena, is understanding over ignorance, compassion over cruelty, wisdom over brute force, and most importantly, choice over compulsion. The Emperor's face darkened. Clever words, human. But you have not defeated my champion in honorable combat. The terms of the challenge have not been met. It was then that Zextar spoke, his voice carrying with a new kind of authority. Not the authority of fear, but of moral certainty. Your Majesty, he said, never releasing Takeshi's hand. I am your champion no longer. I formally surrender my title, my position, and my allegiance to violence. The human has defeated me completely. Not through force, but through showing me the truth about myself. Gasps echoed through the crowd. No champion had ever voluntarily surrendered their position. The very concept was unthinkable. You cannot resign, the Emperor sputtered. You are bound by contract, by law, by sacred duty. I am bound by nothing, Zextar replied, and in his voice was the strength that had made him legendary, now turned to a new purpose. I choose freedom. I choose to be more than a weapon. And I choose to stand with someone who showed me that another way was possible. The political implications of this moment were staggering. The Empire's greatest symbol of power had just rejected everything the Empire stood for. Around the galaxy on thousands of worlds, beings who had lived under Imperial rule watched their screens and began to imagine what their own choices might be. Emperor Valdius understood that his empire was facing its greatest crisis in millennia. Not from invasion or rebellion, but from something far more dangerous. The idea that there might be a better way to live. Guards, he commanded. Arrest them both for breach of contract and sedition. But something extraordinary happened. The Imperial Guard, elite warriors who had never questioned an order, hesitated. They looked at the small human and the transformed champion standing hand in hand on the arena floor, and found themselves unable to move. One guard, a massive Centaurian warrior, slowly removed his helmet and placed it on the ground. Then another. Within minutes, dozens of the Empire's most loyal soldiers had laid down their weapons. We will not arrest someone for choosing peace, the guard captain announced, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics. We have seen enough violence in service to power. Perhaps it is time we served something greater. The crowd's roar returned, louder than before. The transformation was spreading beyond the arena floor, beyond even the stadium itself. Across the galaxy, Imperial governors watched their own forces begin to question, to doubt, to choose. In the midst of the chaos, Takeshi remained perfectly calm. He had expected this reaction. True change was never easy, never comfortable for those in power. But like water wearing away stone, it was unstoppable once it began. Your Majesty, he called up to the Emperor's platform, you still have a choice. You can try to maintain control through fear and violence as you always have, or you can join us in building something better. Never, Valdius roared. I am the Emperor. I rule through strength. No, said a new voice from the crowd. It was the young Aquarian who had started the applause. You rule through our fear. But we are not afraid anymore. The words spread through the arena like wildfire. We are not afraid anymore. Beings who had lived their entire lives under Imperial oppression found their voices, found their courage, found their power. Emperor Valdius looked around his empire and saw it crumbling before his eyes, not through war or invasion, but through the simple realization that another way was possible. On the arena floor, Zextar turned to Takeshi with wonder in his eyes. How did you know this would happen? Because, Takeshi smiled, the greatest victory is always won in the heart first. Once one heart changes, it gives permission for all hearts to change. Your choice to embrace peace gave everyone else permission to do the same. As the arena erupted in celebration around them, as an empire built on violence began to transform into something built on choice, Zextar understood that his real life was just beginning. The destroyer was dead. Something infinitely more powerful had taken his place. 5 years had passed since the day that changed the galaxy forever. The Galactic Empire, as it had existed for millennia, was no more. Emperor Valdius had eventually fled to his private fortress world, ruling over a handful of systems still loyal to the old ways. But most of the galaxy had chosen a different path, one inspired by an elderly human and a transformed warrior standing hand in hand on an arena floor. The Colosseum of Andromeda Prime still stood, but it had been converted into something unrecognizable from its violent origins. Where gladiators once fought to the death, now philosophers from across the galaxy came to share wisdom. Where crowds once screamed for blood, audiences now gathered to hear poetry, music, and stories from every corner of known space. In what had once been the champion's quarters, Master Takeshi Yamamoto sat in quiet meditation. At 78, he moved even more slowly than before, but his eyes held the same gentle wisdom that had changed the course of galactic history. He was no longer alone in his morning rituals. Zextar, now known simply as Zex, knelt beside him in the traditional meditation posture. The former destroyer had spent the last 5 years learning everything he could about philosophy. science, and the arts. His 4 powerful hands, once instruments of death, now created intricate sculptures that were sought after across a dozen star systems. "Master," Zek said softly as they completed their morning meditation, "I still sometimes dream about the old days. About fighting, about being the champion." Takeshi opened his eyes and smiled. "And how do you feel when you wake from these dreams?" "Grateful," Zex replied without hesitation. "Grateful that they are only dreams now." Through the great windows of their chamber, they could see the transformation that had swept across Andromeda Prime. The planet that had once been the Empire's center of violent entertainment was now known as the hub of understanding, a place where beings came to learn, to grow, to find their own paths to peace. The changes had not been without cost. Several systems had descended into chaos when Imperial control collapsed. Some worlds had erupted in civil wars as different factions struggled for power. But gradually the message that had begun in an arena was spreading. There was a better way. Human diplomats, trained in the ancient arts of conflict resolution, had become some of the galaxy's most sought-after mediators. The small, seemingly weak species that the Empire had once dismissed was now helping other civilizations find paths to peace. "Master," Zex said, "I received word yesterday that the Krenarian sector has requested assistance with their territorial disputes. They want me to help mediate." Takeshi nodded approvingly. "And how does that make you feel?" "Terrified," Zex admitted. "What if I fail? What if my presence makes things worse? What if they see the destroyer I used to be instead of who I'm trying to become?" "Fear is wisdom recognizing the importance of the task," Takeshi said gently. "The fact that you are afraid means you understand the responsibility you carry." The old Zextar was never afraid because he never truly cared about the consequences of his actions. Zex stood and walked to the window, looking out at the crowds of beings below. Families from hundreds of worlds wandered peacefully through what had once been the staging areas for gladiatorial combat. Children played where warriors had once prepared for death. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had chosen differently that day," he said. "If I had fought you as everyone expected." "You would have won physically," Takeshi replied, joining him at the window. "But you would have lost everything that mattered. You would have remained a prisoner of your own strength. And you would have died for your people's freedom. Perhaps. Or perhaps I would have found another way. The path of wisdom always reveals new options to those who look for them." A soft chime indicated that visitors were approaching. The door opened to admit a group that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. Former Imperial governors, rebel leaders, and representatives from dozens of previously warring factions, all working together on what they called the new Galactic Cooperative. "Master Takeshi, Master Zex," said their leader, a graceful Silverian whose species had once been enslaved by the Empire. "We've come to ask for your guidance on the Outer Rim situation." For the next several hours, the former champion and the elderly ninja worked with beings who had once been enemies, helping them find solutions that honored everyone's needs. It was slow work, often frustrating, but it was building something that had never existed before, a galaxy governed by cooperation rather than conquest. As the last of the visitors departed, Zex and Takeshi returned to their evening meditation. The sun was setting over Andromeda Prime, painting the sky in brilliant colors that had always been there but had never been appreciated during the violent years. "Master," Zex said quietly, "do you think we really changed anything? Sometimes it feels like we just replaced one system with another." Takeshi was quiet for a long moment watching the sunset. "Do you remember what you asked me on that first day? How I could win without fighting?" "Yes. The answer is not in the winning, it is in the choosing. Every day, billions of beings across the galaxy wake up and choose not to solve their problems with violence. They choose to listen instead of attacking, to understand instead of conquering. That choice, multiplied across countless lives, is changing everything." Zex nodded, understanding. "And tomorrow? Tomorrow we make the choice again. And the day after that, and the day after that. Change is not a destination, my friend. It is a path we walk every day." As night fell over what had once been the most violent place in the galaxy, 2 unlikely friends sat in peaceful contemplation. The destroyer had learned to create. The warrior had learned to heal. And across the stars, countless beings were discovering that the greatest strength of all was the courage to choose compassion over conquest. In a small temple on Earth, A new inscription had been added to honor Master Takeshi's journey to the stars. The supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. But perhaps more importantly, in a small garden on Corax Prime, where a young Zextar had once dreamed of understanding the patterns of crystals, a monument now stood bearing different words. Every ending is also a beginning. The galaxy had learned what the elderly ninja had always known, that true victory came not from defeating others, but from helping them discover who they were meant to be, and in that discovery everyone won.